I've been involved with these horses for almost 40 years now, and we got involved by accident. You know, it's not something we set out to do. We've seen happen to these horses where they've gone from originally when the Native Americans, you know, had them to where they are now. It's been pretty strange for them. With the Theodore Roosevelt National Park in western North Dakota now for almost 35 years or better. Got involved in the late 1970s. Our family, I had a lot of brothers, sisters that competed in the Great American Horse Race. It was just a cross-country race, you know, racing from here to there to there. The cowboys did it, the natives loved horse racing, the cavalry. So, you know, we were competing and we were running horses, quarter horse, thoroughbred, cross types like everybody else. And when they got that 8-9 years of age, where they should have been in their prime, we were having breakdown problems, you know, hoof, bone. Brother Leo, he had spent a lot of time in that park, and we grew up with horses, been around horses all our lives. And he had a very good eye for, you know, horses and horse flesh. And originally, we picked him up to crossbreed into our competition horses, and this happened in the late 1970s. And that was the same time frame when Superintendent Wickwire came along, and in the Theodore Roosevelt National Park policy out there was whoever was park superintendent dictated horse policy because these horses were never protected by the Wild Horse, Wild Burro Act. The Theodore Roosevelt National Park got an exemption from that law when that law was passed, so that meant whoever was park superintendent pretty well dictated policy. Well, the Superintendent Wickwire came along, and he had a nice relationship with a lot of the local ranchers. He liked to shoot pool, so he decided that they were going to change the phenotype of that horse out there. And the way to do that, they decided, was to introduce different studs. So a number of the local ranchers there bought a Shire stud off the Brookman Ranch out of Montana. He was a Shire cross stud, and he was known for raising bucking horses because they were using a lot of them Shire cross studs, mares in their bucking horse programs. And they donated him to the Theodore Roosevelt National Park. They also donated a couple of quarter horse studs, and Les Sal now donated an Arabian stallion. And this is when they realized that they needed to eliminate the competition in the park because these introduced domestic stallions didn't have an opportunity or didn't know how to maintain a mare herd. I mean, they couldn't do it. And so that's when the Theodore Roosevelt National Park decided to use helicopters, 2 helicopters and outriders, And at every roundup, they target the dominant native stallions, the lead mares, and keep taking that type out so that these introduced stallions could start making an impact on that herd. In 1991, Leo and I were successful at talking the national park into taking out the introduced stallions, start doing some blood work on the horses. They bled the horses they sold that year, and a little more humane way to round them up and handle them. So they did take out the introduced stallions in 1991, but they left the majority of that Brookmanshire cross. They left the majority of his offspring out there in that park. One of the reasonings for them to want to change the genophenotype of the herd was because they said that the herd was inbreeding, which wasn't a problem at all back then. In fact, in the 1970s, BLM wild horse expert came to the Theodore Roosevelt National Park to examine the herd, take a look at the herd, and his comment was this was one of the healthiest, most diverse wild horse group in the United States. Matter of not even 40 years, they went to a very diverse, unique pheno historically correct horse to a very inbred, mostly Shire cross type of horse. It's not only that they're having inbreeding problems in that park, but they've also been experimenting with a drug called Gonacon on their mares. And what I've noticed, when they first started administering the drug, the mare or the birth rate increased quite a bit. But I've also noticed now, since they've been using the drug, huge differences in the herd, not only conformation-wise, but they're having more lethal whites, which I'm sure comes out of that Shire cross bloodline. They're having foals that are staying on with the mothers for years, which shouldn't be. They're foaling year-round, which shouldn't be happening either. This is a national park that should have been protecting these horses. When that park was fenced in, the policy originally was total elimination of the horses because they weren't native to the area like your elk and your deer, et cetera, so they figured they needed to be out of there. And they tried numerous ways to get rid of them. Box Canyon roundups. They'd hire local ranchers in the springtime when it was freezing, and thawing, and the local ranchers would sharp shot their saddle horses. They'd go out and rope what they could, usually the young, the weak, the older. They set snares. They shot some of them. One winter, when it was a tough winter, they poisoned the hay, but the bison ate it. Then they'd also hire local ranchers at times to, they used their jeeps, and once you knew a wild horse's territory, they run a big circle. And they used their jeeps to keep them moving until they thought they'd have them getting tired, and they'd unload your saddle horses and rope what they could. And fortunately, though, back then, some of the local people started complaining to their congressional delegation in Washington, D.C. It was Burdick, Young, and Anderson, if I remember right. And they were able, because them horses have been there as long anybody could remember.
Right.
So then they were able to get the Theodore Roosevelt National Park to keep some in there as a historical demonstration herd. Went along okay until the late 1970s when Superintendent Wickwire came along and decided that we need to change the phenotype of that horse. Well, that horse can be traced back to Sitting Bull and his sub-chiefs when he was tricked into coming into Fort Beaufort, and they took his horses and weapons away. Also to other Northern Plains Native people. That was the type of horse that was here. So that horse has been surviving here for hundreds of years,
Right.
And whether that horse originated from the Spaniards or other European stock, a lot of your Northern Plains Native American oral history is that their horse was a gift from their creator. And I respect their history just as much, probably more than I do a lot of our history, because a lot of our history is written by the conquerors, So this is a type of horse that's been here. It was developed here. I mean, you're just like we developed quarter horse, thoroughbred, Morgan, American saddle horse. Natives in different parts of this country developed their types of horses. Prime example is the original Nez Perce Appaloosa. The Northern Plains natives are always known to have a little larger, square built, round bones, somewhat mulish in the hocks, generally round color. When Sitting Bull surrendered him and they took his horses, they ended up being bought up by the Marquis de Morris. But also Theodore Roosevelt, who came out to North Dakota to hunt right after his wife and mother died within a day's time frame, and he ranched out here, and he wrote in his journals his outfit was the same as any other, whether his horses from the wild or the Indians. That's the type of horse that was there when that park was fenced in. Now they have a major inbreeding problem. They're also, the way they're calling and the way they're using the Gonacon drugs, they're going to end up with an old herd that's going to die off eventually. Right. That's the bottom line. And the inbreeding issue is going to make that problem go quicker, or that die off go quicker.
Right.
This is a national park. They should, they need to do an interpretive center out that park for these horses. They need to recognize the Northern Plains Native people's horses. They need to recognize that culture, that history, that gift from their creator that we kept taking away and destroying and getting rid of. They need to recognize that just as bad as we need to recognize Theodore Roosevelt, but we need to recognize that, I think, way more. This country wouldn't let this happen to the American quarter horse. If there was less than 1,000 of the American quarter horse in this country, people wouldn't let that continue to happen.
Right.
Why is there such a difference? They're a very unique, historically, genetically correct horse.
Right.
Why should there be a difference? I mean, they're important. They're important to our history. They're important to our future. They're important to the Northern Plains natives. It's part of their lives. It's like the buffalo, the bison we just about destroyed, so they didn't have nothing to eat and nothing, clothing and, So we continue to destroy their things, and say the National Park just calls them feral horses, which means anything, any type, They know what they had out there. They have a study that was done by Dr. Castle McLaughlin from the Peabody Museum. They know that that horse had connections to Sitting Bull, Theodore Roosevelt, Marquis de Moors. H.C. Heidi Cooper was one of the largest horse ranchers in the United States, ranching down in Amadon, North Dakota, in the 1880s, handpicked 62 mares off of the Marquis de Moors, the Sitting Bull's horses, and brought in a stud, a thoroughbred stud called Bound. He was 15, 2 hands tall, bald face, gray. He crossed him with the native horse, and there he is looking for a horse that was a little more hot-blooded, but he wanted all the fine qualities. I mean, the survival, the fit qualities, the hoof, the bone, able to survive the weather, and he was selling that cross. And in 1884, he called that cross the American Horse, was selling some out in the Chicago area for up to $2,200 for polo horses. So, I mean, that's when horses were horses. I mean, that's when they were used, and that's when they were bred and developed for specific uses. I mean, he bred for carriage horses, for, he ran anywhere from 4,000 to 7,000 head of horses at a time. Wow. Had different studs, different mare bands, bred for different purposes. That's when horses were our pickups, our tractors, and that's what I mean. There's so terrible much equine history here, from the natives to now in this part of the country. It amazes me, that I mean, we all make mistakes in our lives, and this national park, a superintendent made a mistake back in the 70s. And there hasn't been one superintendent, regardless of what they promise you, that has ever tried to take that mistake and make it right regardless. This is our park. This is everybody's park. It's not their choices to make. And especially when they make a wrong choice like that. And for the last 35 years, they've been telling Leo and me, our wild horse experts and us know what we're doing. Well, the evidence is right there. They've got inbreeding, they got all kinds of issues out there now, all kinds. And at the rate they're going, they're gonna have a herd that's dead. Ever since we've learned, at first when I'm going, and this is before the 100-year celebration of Sitting Bull's supposedly surrender, in the early 1980s, maybe 100 years ago when we got his horses, impossible, but the horses spoke for themselves, and they said, we grew up around horses. I mean, their conformation, they were different, the colors, everything. And they spoke for themselves that way. But yeah, we've, ever since, these are what they are, and these is what should be there, and this is what should stay there. Through the processes, in the 1980s and 1990s and early 2000s, the park started so-called involving us in the process of selection, but they pretty well did what they did or wanted to do. They were supposed to keep some of the native stallions. That's all we got at the roundup. We got no more helicopter time, so we got to call this one. But they know what they're doing. They have no clue. And there's no integrity left in our park system. And yes, this is just a small thing, these horses. But that's not just the horses. You start looking and learning, and these superintendents have way too much power, and really don't answer anybody. And I've been working with the system for many years. Nobody answers to nobody. They might reply back once and that's it. And both Leo and I are Vietnam vets. And if they would have told us back then that you're working for the government, you don't have to do your job, I mean, it ain't right. I mean, I don't care. You made a mistake. The evidence is there. Now you can see how bad a mistake you made. It's time to do the right thing. 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 I love to work with the park, and I'm sure the conservatives would love to work with the park also. I mean, it's not something you're going to go in and change overnight, and make drastic changes. This has got to be a slow, thought out, correctly thought out process. It's going to take 40, 50 years maybe, to get anything close to what they had out there, but, it can be done. Either you introduce mares, which would work, but when you look at the inbreeding problem they have now, you're going to be using them same bloodline studs. You can impact a herd quicker by putting in studs to maintain your own herd and see how they do as far as gathering, but you can start impacting the herd quicker that way if they pick up a few mares here and there, and at least you're getting outside blood, it'll take a long time, but it can be done. The natural survival instincts, that I don't think that's what you need out there. And, they're not going to be afraid of people, but they're like a lot of animals. If they don't fear something, they don't run from it. These horses in the park, they've gotten a lot more docile, but they're no longer being chased by helicopters and outriders and since the park was fenced in, they're trying to get rid of some of them, or, and then they have to round up because they got to keep the numbers down. But, the called horses, they could have some nice programs that they could work with different reservations here where they integrate these horses out of the park into equine therapy, equine jobs. The equine therapy. Horses are good for you, and they need more equine therapy on the reservations. But there's also so many other jobs that the equine industry can create. Like a vet assistant or horseshoer or trimmer or horse masseuse. There's all kinds of different venues in the horse industry also. So there's a lot of good they could do with it and not have to so much worry about, you're gonna have to control the population somewhat, but have a venue for them, have an avenue, have an outlet for them where they go to good places and are put in the programs, or used in equine programs. I don't imagine they'll be ready next year either. You know, I mean, they got no clue how to manage the mismanaged mess they have. I mean, how do they fix that mess? You know, without saying, oops. So I keep thinking what they're going to want to do is hopefully the whole herd dies out and people will forget about it. Oh, they died from a disease or, you know.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, yeah, management plan, town hall meetings, they've promised that. I don't know how many superintendents promised it to us. I don't, you know, it's been going on and on and on. But they always said we know what we're doing with our wild horses, you know, us and our wild horse experts. But it's pretty evident they don't know what they're doing, no clue.
No.
You know, they're calling all the young ones, you know, and it's like, you know. Well, you're lacking, you know, genetics just because of everything they're doing. I mean, that's the mess they got. You know, and you know, and even coming in with an experimental drug and not even doing any impact studies prior to using the study or any, you know, I mean, how many of their wild animals are they using experimental drugs on? You know, they've got an overpopulation of prairie dogs, and you know, but the horses, Well, I don't know either. But it's time they did the right thing, you know, and that's to recognize that was the horse they had there was unique. Well, first of all, thank you for that, but nobody does anything by yourself. I mean, it wouldn't have been for our parents, you know, who gave up their land, and, you know, we started bringing more horses in, and, you know, family, my wife, my children, friends now, you know, so we're an important part of it, but even though you're an important part of it, if that other little piece wasn't there, you wouldn't be a part of it, so. You know, from, you know, about 40 years ago when nobody knew, cared, or you know, were even aware, you know, to where these horses are now, you know, yeah, we made some great progress. I mean, we went from 200 or less back then, and we're still at 1,000 or less of these Nakotas in the world today. But we've got 4 breeders in France. We've got a couple of breeders in Sweden, Berlin. We've got breeders across the United States. So I mean, we've come a long ways, and a lot of that's due to, you know, putting the Nokota Horse Conservancy together, our nonprofit, and that was with the help of Charles and Blair Fleshman. From Pennsylvania. Their Charles' family was Fleshman Foods at one time. So I mean, we've met a lot of wonderful people that have helped us make some good steps and forward steps. So, I mean, the horses, I'm sure, I'm hoping will always be here. I worry about, like, what's happening in every industry when it comes to animals. People come in, oh, I want you this way or that way, and we change them. And these horses here that come out of that park, I mean, they survived because they were the strongest and the smartest, especially as hard as they were pushed and tried to be rounded up and eliminated. So, I mean, we've come a long ways. We've got a long ways to go. Even though we're a nonprofit. And that's been one of the hardest things about a nonprofit for me is you got to ask for money. Our parents taught us that if you want something, you work for it. You didn't get it, you didn't work hard enough.
Yeah.
You know, so So that's always been a hard thing to ask for, is that money. But I've got friends that tell me, oh, you're not asking for yourself, you're asking for the horses. It's still hard to do. They always need money, but that's every nonprofit I know. Well, right now, our major funding goal right now is to have enough money to take care of the horses the Conservancy owns. I mean, they've had having some tough times financially. I mean, so I mean, we need to become financially stable enough to, take care of our horses. From there, our goals are to create a sanctuary where, like I said, you have to micromanage, because reality is you're not going to go find out 1,000 acres, 200,000 acres and let them, take care of, especially with no predators. So, a sanctuary where we keep them, like they should be, and make sure we don't change them, and make sure they have a future, and educate people about them. I mean, and promote them and make people aware, that they're there. So. It's time to do the right thing. It's time to do the right thing.